The hot winds of Essos blew fiercely over the Dothraki Sea, but Khal Drogo stood taller than any storm. The fever that once threatened to kill him had been driven out by a wise healer, not Miri Maz Dur, but one loyal to Daenerys. She had found another way, a secret way, to save her son and stars, and so Khal Drogo lived, not broken, not weak, but as strong and fierce as ever. Daenerys had wept when he awoke, her silver hair falling like a curtain around his face. He had cupped her cheek and smiled, the old strength in his dark eyes. "Moon of my life," he whispered. And she knew the gods had given her a second chance, but things had changed while Drogo slept. The dragons had been born, Rhaegal, Viserion and Drogon, and Daenerys was no longer just Khaleesi. She was the mother of dragons, and her dreams stretched across the narrow sea, toward Westeros, toward the Iron Throne. At first, Drogo did not care for thrones of melted swords. His world was horses, blood, and wide skies. Yet Daenerys spoke of her family's honor, of reclaiming her birthright. Slowly, he began to listen. Slowly, the Khal of the Great Grass Sea became something more. A conqueror not just of men, but of kingdoms. They built a fleet. The Dothraki had always feared the ocean, but for their Khal and his Khaleesi, they boarded the ships. Many perished at sea, but many more survived, hardened by storms and hunger. And when they landed in Westeros, the ground itself seemed to tremble under the hooves of 1,000 screamers. But Westeros was no land of easy battles. The south was full of treacherous lords and broken promises. The north was colder, fiercer, and ruled by a young man who was no ordinary lord, Jon Snow. The bastard of Winterfell had risen high, king in the north, they called him. A man bound by honor, loyalty, and a deep, bitter knowledge of what war truly cost. When the ravens came, carrying news of dragons and Dothraki crossing the sea, Jon had stared into the flames and said only, "Winter is here, and so is fire." He gathered his bannermen, called his armies, and waited. Unlike the Southron lords, Jon did not fear Daenerys. He feared what she might awaken. The long night was coming, and it would not be fought with swords and politics. It would be fought with fire, with blood, and with unity. Jon decided to meet this dragon queen and her mighty Khal himself. He would look into their eyes and see if they were the allies he needed, or the enemies he must destroy. On a grey morning, the tide low and the mist thick, Jon Snow and a small band of loyal men landed on Dragonstone, the ancestral seat of House Targaryen. The Black Castle loomed over the cliffs like a crow watching for prey. The banners of House Targaryen, the three-headed dragon, flew proudly in the salted wind. Jon's heart was heavy as he climbed the steep steps. He had seen many battles, buried many friends. He did not come to kneel, he came to find hope, or to declare war. Inside the throne room, Khal Drogo stood beside Daenerys like a mountain made of flesh. His dark eyes followed Jon's every move. He wore no crown, no cloak of velvet, only leather, steel, and the scars of 100 battles. Beside him, Daenerys sat on a black stone chair, her dragons restless in the shadows. Jon bowed his head briefly, out of respect, but not submission. His grey eyes met Daenerys's, then Drogo's. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the distant roar of a dragon filled the hall. Then Drogo stepped forward, his voice like thunder rolling across the mountains. "Who are you to come before my Khaleesi?" he demanded, his Dothraki accent thick but clear. Jon did not flinch. He tightened his hand around the hilt of Longclaw and answered in a voice steady as stone, "I am Jon Snow, king in the north, and I came to see if fire and ice can stand together, or if we must burn each other to ash." For a moment there was silence, then Drogo laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed off the cold stone walls, but there was no kindness in it, only challenge, and somewhere in that moment, a storm began to brew. A storm that would decide the fate of Westeros. The laughter died on Drogo's lips, but his eyes burned with a warrior's fire. He circled Jon slowly, like a predator sizing up another predator. Jon stayed still, his boots planted firmly on the cold stone floor. He had faced whites, White Walkers, and worse. He would not be intimidated by a Dothraki Khal, no matter how many legends surrounded him. Daenerys leaned forward on her throne, her silver hair glinting in the dim torchlight. Her dragons stirred in the shadows, their deep growls rumbling low. She studied Jon Snow with sharp, curious eyes. Here was a man unlike the others she had met. No sweet lies, no desperate flattery. Only a hard truth carved into a young face. Khal. "Drogo," Daenerys said softly, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "He is not our enemy." Drogo grunted, but did not look away from Jon. "He smells of wolves," he said, "of cold death." Jon allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. "You're not wrong." At Daenerys' nod, Jon was allowed to speak freely. He explained the threat from beyond the wall, the army of the dead, the Night King, and the darkness that crept closer with every passing day. His words were plain, heavy, and without decoration. He spoke like a man with no time left for pretty speeches. Daenerys listened, but it was Drogo who laughed again, though this time with a darker edge. "Ghost stories," he muttered in Dothraki. "The dead stay dead." "No, they don't," Jon said sharply, and for the first time, something flickered in Drogo's hard gaze, a glint of uncertainty. Tyrion Lannister, standing quietly to the side, chose that moment to step forward. "My Lord Khal," he said carefully, "I have seen it with my own eyes. Corpses that walk, that kill. If we do not unite, there will be no Iron Throne left to fight over, no 7 kingdoms, only death." Drogo's jaw tightened. He did not like fear. He had been taught since boyhood to crush it underfoot. But the sincerity on Jon's face, the haunted look in Tyrion's eyes, they stirred a feeling he could not ignore. A warrior's instinct, warning him of a coming war unlike any other. Still, Drogo was not a man who bowed to fear. He pointed his bloodied arak at Jon Snow, the blade glinting red in the firelight. "If you lie," Drogo growled, "I will cut your heart from your chest and feed it to my horse." Jon nodded once, calm as the winter snow. "If I lie," he said, "you'll be doing me a kindness." A tense silence stretched between them. Daenerys rose slowly from her seat, her presence pulling every gaze toward her. She stood between Jon and Drogo, one hand touching each of them lightly. A queen holding 2 powerful forces in her hands. "We need each other," she said. "We must fight together. For the living." Drogo looked at her, and for the first time, in his life he saw something bigger than the Dothraki Sea, bigger than his pride. Daenerys had been his world once. Now her world was bigger, and if he loved her, he would have to fight for it too. He lowered his weapon with a grunt. Jon relaxed a fraction, though his body stayed coiled tight, ready for betrayal if it came. The pact was made, not of trust, but of necessity. Yet even as they shook hands roughly, a warrior's grip, strong and unyielding, a silent war had already begun. Not of swords, not of dragons, but of hearts. Drogo could see it in the way Daenerys looked at Jon, not just as an ally, but as something more dangerous. And Jon, though he wore the heavy crown of duty, was still a man of blood and bone. A man who had already died once. A man who might be willing to die again, but not without leaving his mark on her heart. In the shadows, the dragons growled low. It was not just winter that was coming. It was jealousy, pride, love, and death. The days that followed were uneasy. The Dothraki camped outside Dragonstone, restless and wild, their horses uneasy on the rocky shores of Westeros. The northern men Jon had brought with him stood stiff and suspicious, watching the foreigners, with cold eyes. Fights broke out easily, and only Drogo's iron command and Jon's quiet authority kept blood from spilling. Inside the castle, alliances were being tested in quieter, deadlier ways. Jon spent long hours with Daenerys, planning the war against the Night King. They pored over maps by firelight, discussed strategies until the candles burned low. Khal Drogo often watched from a distance, his broad arms crossed over his chest, his face unreadable. He didn't like it. He didn't like the way Jon Snow leaned in when Daenerys spoke, how their voices dropped low in shared secrets. He didn't like the way Daenerys smiled, not the cold, commanding smile of a queen, but the rare, real smile she used to give only him. Drogo told himself it was nothing. That Daenerys was his Khaleesi, his moon, his wife, that she loved him, that she always would. But doubt, once planted, grows like a weed. One evening, after a tense council meeting, Drogo cornered Daenerys in her private chambers. The fire roared, behind them throwing long, wild shadows on the stone walls. "You spend too much time with the wolf," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Daenerys looked at him sharply, silver hair flowing over her shoulders like liquid moonlight. She wore no crown here, no armor of command, only her skin, her scars, her truth. "And you spend too much time brooding over what you do not understand," she replied coolly. Drogo's hand twitched at his side, longing for the comfort of his Arak. But he would not draw steel on her, never her. He stepped closer instead, towering over her, his body radiating heat and anger. "He wants you," Drogo said bluntly. "I see it. Every man wants what he cannot have." Daenerys tilted her chin up defiantly. "And what of you, my sun and stars? You conquered me once. Do you think I am still something to be owned?" Drogo froze. The words hit him harder than any sword. He had always thought of their bond as unbreakable, forged in fire, blood, and love. But she was not the timid girl he had once lifted onto, his horse. She was a queen now, with a mind and a will as fierce as his own. "You are mine," he said. But there was a question in it now, a fear he could not hide. Daenerys stepped close, placing her hand on his chest, over the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I am yours," she whispered. "But I am also more. And I need allies. I need Jon Snow." Drogo closed his eyes briefly. He could accept needing armies, ships, dragons, but needing another man, that burned like acid. Still he nodded, because he loved her more than he loved his pride. For now. But not all storms could be weathered with love alone. Meanwhile, Jon Snow wrestled with his own demons. Each day he spent with Daenerys pulled him deeper into a dangerous place. She was not just a queen. She was fire itself, fierce, beautiful, impossible to touch without being burned. He tried to remember his vows, his duty, the army of the dead. But every glance, every accidental brush of her hand against his, weakened his defenses. He told himself it was foolish, that she loved the great Khal, a man of blood and conquest. What did he, a bastard born in the cold, have to offer a dragon queen? Still he dreamed of her. Still he fought the war within his heart, and far to the north, beyond the wall, the Night King marched. He did not care for the petty wars of men. He did not care who loved whom, or who ruled what kingdom. He brought only one thing, death. The cold winds from the north grew sharper with every passing day. Raven after raven brought darker news, villages abandoned, wildlings disappearing, white shadows glimpsed in the forests beyond the wall. It was Jon who finally stood before Daenerys and Khal Drogo and said, "We cannot wait any longer. We must ride north." Drogo leaned against the stone pillar of the council chamber, arms crossed, a fierce glint in his eye. He cared little for the dead. He only cared for the living ones standing before him. His men were ready to fight, but they were. Dothraki, they feared magic, and worse, they hated the cold. "The dead fear fire," Jon said firmly, "and we have fire." He glanced at the dragons resting outside, their great wings stirring the salty air of Dragonstone. Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, creatures of legend and terror. Daenerys looked to Drogo, seeking his answer. His jaw tightened. "My riders will follow me," he said gruffly, "even into the land of frozen death. But know this, Snow." He stepped forward, his voice dropping low, deadly. "If this is a lie, if you lead us into darkness for nothing, I will break you before the others do." Jon nodded grimly. He understood. In truth, he wondered if he deserved it. The fleet sailed at dawn, and Dothraki unsullied northern men, dragons flying overhead. It was a sight Westeros had not seen in thousands of years. Fire and ice bound together, hurtling toward an ancient enemy. But even as they sailed, the storm between Jon, Drogo, and Daenerys raged in secret. In the quiet nights aboard the ships, Daenerys often stood at the prow, staring out at the black waters ahead. Jon found himself drawn to her again and again, exchanging quiet words, shared fears, silent understandings. No kisses, no touches, but the space between them grew hot. Charged, dangerous, Drogo saw. Drogo knew. One night, as the moon carved a silver path across the ocean, Drogo found Jon alone, sharpening his sword by lantern light. For a moment, there was only the scrape of steel against stone. Then Drogo spoke. "Does the wolf dream of the dragon?" Jon looked up sharply, frowning. "I have no dreams," Jon said, "only duty." Drogo smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who knew what he would have to do if the unthinkable happened. "Dreams betray men," Drogo said, "and women." He turned and walked away, his heavy boots thudding against the deck. But the warning lingered like smoke in the cold night air. Jon tightened his grip on Longclaw. He had not touched Daenerys, he had not kissed her, had not spoken any foolish words of love. But in the quiet, secret places of his heart, he knew the truth. If he survived the war against the Night King, his battles would only just begin. Because some wars are not fought with swords or armies, some wars are fought with hearts, and hearts were far harder to conquer. The next day they made landfall in the north. The sight that greeted them chilled even the fiercest Dothraki screamers. Endless fields of snow, forests black and dead, the sky a low, oppressive grey. Winter had come in full. Jon led them through the white wilderness, back toward Winterfell, where his people waited. The northern lords were suspicious of Daenerys and openly hostile to Khal Drogo and his wild horsemen. There were whispers of betrayal, of southern ambition, of dragons burning northern fields. Tensions burned hot, even as the cold tried to freeze them all. Daenerys walked the halls of Winterfell like a queen already, her dragons perched on the walls like monstrous gargoyles. But Drogo, he moved like a caged wolf, snorting at the cold, baring his teeth at every slight, every insult. He hated the North. He hated the way they looked at Daenerys, with fear, with distrust. Most of all, he hated the way Jon Snow stood at her side, always close, always trusted. And in the darkness beyond the wall, the Night King prepared his armies. The dead would not wait for Jon or Drogo or Daenerys to settle their jealousies and fears. The dead had already begun to march. The north was colder than Drogo had ever imagined. Every breath felt like knives slicing his throat. His Dothraki riders wrapped themselves in furs, but they hated the snow, hated the stillness of the frozen forests. In the great grass sea, life was everywhere, wild, loud, teeming with energy. Here everything felt dead already. Winterfell's walls loomed large, but inside the castle no one truly smiled. Fear hung heavier than the snow on the roofs. Jon moved through his home with the heavy tread of a man carrying too much. His people looked at him with hope and worry, expecting him to have all the answers. But Jon Snow was a man made of battles and regrets, not miracles. In the great hall under the dark banners of House Stark, war councils were held. Daenerys stood beside Jon, her dragon's presence weighing heavily over every conversation. Tyrion advised caution, Davos urged speed. Sansa watched everything from the shadows, sharp-eyed and cold, and Drogo sat silent in the councils, his hand always resting on his arak, his dark gaze flickering between Jon and Daenerys like a flame ready to leap. The final plan was simple and desperate. Lure a portion of the Night King's army south. Trap them, burn them with dragonfire. Kill the Night King if they could. "If we cut the head," Jon said, voice steady, "the body falls." It sounded easy. It was not. Before they rode out, Jon found Daenerys alone in the Godswood, under the pale, weeping branches of the heart tree. She stood quietly, her breath misting. In the frozen air, her face turned up to the bleeding red leaves. He approached slowly, his boots crunching over the ice. "You should rest," Jon said softly. Daenerys smiled sadly. "Rest? When death rides toward us?" Jon stood beside her, close enough to feel the warmth that clung to her skin even in the deadly cold. He wanted to say something, anything, to pull her closer, but duty chained his tongue. "After this," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "after we win, what will you do, Jon Snow?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to imagine it, a world without the Night King, without war, without endless death. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe live." She turned her face to him, so close now. For a heartbeat, the whole world held its breath, but before either of them could speak, before hands could reach or words could be said, a voice cut through the cold. "Khal wants you," Grey Worm said, his tone tight. Jon stepped back like he had been burned. Daenerys swallowed hard, gathering herself. "I'll come," she said. Jon turned and left without another word, his heart pounding a war drum in his chest. Drogo was waiting for her in the courtyard, mounted atop a fierce black horse. His Dothraki riders gathered around him like shadows. "We ride," he said shortly. The army moved out at dawn, northern men unsullied, Dothraki and dragons circling overhead. They rode for hours through fields of unbroken snow until they found what they were looking for. The dead. Thousands of them, marching without rest, without fear, their eyes glowing like frozen stars. Their ranks stretched across the land like a living storm. Jon drew his sword. The northern men tightened their shields. The Dothraki howled their war cries, and Daenerys, mounted atop Drogon, looked to Khal Drogo, who rode below on his horse, fearless, magnificent, unstoppable. Their eyes met. A silent vow passed between them. Today they would fight. Today they would either burn bright or be swallowed by the endless night. And somewhere beyond the endless ranks of the dead, the Night King watched, silent and waiting. He had not forgotten the Dragon Queen. He had not forgotten Jon Snow, and he had not forgotten Khal Drogo. The warrior fate had refused to kill once. This time, he would not fail. The blizzard hit as they formed their battle. Lines. Snow lashed their faces. Freezing fingers wrapped tight around sword hilts and spears. The Dothraki roared their war cries into the swirling dark, their horses stamping nervously. Northern men stood grim, shoulder to shoulder, shields up against an enemy that did not feel fear. From the distant hills, the dead came. Not marching. Charging, thousands of them, rotting, broken, some armored, some still wearing the frozen faces of people once loved. At their head rode wights on skeletal horses, and above them, circling like a vulture, was Viserion, Daenerys' fallen dragon, now breathing blue fire under the Night King's command. Daenerys and Drogon soared into the sky, unleashing a torrent of flame, cutting a burning path through the enemy. Rhaegal followed, screeching his fury. On the ground, Khal Drogo raised his arak high. "For the living," he bellowed, and the Dothraki thundered forward. Jon Snow, riding at the center with Ghost at his side, charged with the Northmen, Longclaw, gleaming like a shard of fallen star. The armies clashed in a shattering roar of steel and bone. Drogo fought like the storm itself. He swung his arak in wide, brutal arcs, cutting down wights 2, 3 at a time. His horse leapt over fallen bodies. His war cries split the howling wind. He was unstoppable, a god of death riding through the end of the world. Jon fought with quieter fury. Every swing of Longclaw was precise, deadly. Ghost tore into the dead like a shadow of teeth and rage. Jon's eyes searched the battlefield, not for glory, but for the Night King. Above them, Daenerys hurled fire into the ranks of the undead, but it was like trying to stop the tide. For every wight burned, 5 more took its place, and then, through the snow, he appeared, the Night King tall, icy, his blue eyes burning with cruel certainty. He rode Viserion, and when he saw Daenerys on Drogon, he struck. Blue fire met red. The sky exploded with terrible light. Drogon roared, wings, beating hard against the force of the Night King's assault. Daenerys held fast, guiding Drogon into desperate spiraling dives, dodging the deadly blue flames. On the ground, Jon saw them struggling and knew, if Daenerys fell, all hope would fall with her. He spurred his horse forward, cutting his way through. The dead, heart pounding, lungs burning, he had to reach her. He had to protect her. Drogo saw too. But Drogo did not charge toward Daenerys. His instincts, honed by a lifetime of blood and battle, told him something worse, something that Jon Snow, blinded by love, did not see. The Night King was baiting them, drawing them closer. Drogo roared to his men, "Protect the Queen!" But it was too late. The Night King dismounted in the heart of the battlefield. Around him the dead surged, shielding him like a living wall. He raised one hand, and the corpses of the fallen Dothraki, northern men and unsullied, began to rise. A second army. Jon fought his way forward, but the dead overwhelmed him. Ghost was dragged down, snarling and snapping. Jon slashed wildly. Desperate, but there were too many. Daenerys saw Jon in trouble. Without thinking, she urged Drogon lower, blasting flame across the field, trying to clear a path. And that was when the Night King struck. He hurled an icy spear through the air, faster than any arrow. It struck Drogon deep in the side. The great beast screamed in agony, faltering, wings beating erratically. Daenerys clung to his back, screaming his name. Drogon crashed hard into the ground, throwing up a mountain of snow and broken earth. Daenerys was thrown from his back, landing hard. She struggled to rise, dazed, bleeding, and the Night King advanced, calm, certain. Drogo saw her fall, and without hesitation, without fear, he charged. Through the army of the dead, through the whirling storm, Khal Drogo fought like a man already dead. Blades cut him, spears pierced him. Still, he fought. He reached Daenerys just as the Night King raised his icy sword. Drogo hurled himself at the ancient monster. The Night King was fast, inhumanly fast. Their blades clashed once, the icy sword meeting the red-hot steel of Drogo's arak. Then the Night King drove his blade through Drogo's stomach. Drogo grunted, a terrible sound, but instead of falling back, he grabbed the Night King by the arms, holding him tight. "Now, Khaleesi," he roared. Daenerys, shaking, bleeding, barely conscious, understood. She screamed Drogon's name. The wounded dragon struggled to rise, flames building in his ruined chest, and Drogon unleashed a final, furious blast of fire, pure, blinding. Golden red, it engulfed them both, Drogo and the Night King. The Night King screamed for the first and only time. His icy armor cracked, melted, his body shattering into 1,000 burning shards. Khal Drogo's scream was lost in the roar of the fire. When the light faded, there was nothing left of either. The dead collapsed, all at once, as if puppets had their strings cut. The battle was over, but the cost was carved into the snow in blood and ash. Jon found Daenerys cradling Drogo's body, what little remained of him. She rocked back and forth, her face twisted in grief, whispering the old Dothraki words of love and loss. He knelt beside her, not knowing what to say. She looked at him with hollow, broken eyes. "He saved us," she whispered. "He saved us all." Jon bowed his head. He had hated Drogo, feared him, envied him, but in the end he could do nothing but honor him. The days that followed were silent and cold. They burned Drogo's body under the heart tree of Winterfell. The Dothraki mourned in their wild, savage way, slashing their faces, tearing their hair. The Northmen stood in grim silence. Daenerys wore no crown as she stood by the pyre. She wore only sorrow. Jon stayed by her side. Not as a king, not as a suitor, just as Jon. They would rebuild. They would heal. But they would never forget the Khal who lived again, only to die so that the world might live. In the end, fire and ice had stood together, but the fire had paid the highest price. And somewhere in the cold winds of the north, Khal Drogo's spirit rode on, fierce, free, and undefeated, sun and stars forever.